Well, it's the greatest play about baseball ever written by a playwright from Fullerton. I knew I knew one person that I went to Fulton College with. He was a theater student, and he left for San Francisco for a couple of years, and he came back down, and he was wanted to do a play in downtown Fullerton, and I saw this play, and I met some of the people involved in the company, and it turned out they were, a couple of them, Michael Malo and Stephen Lamprinos, were thinking of writing a play about the Beat generation, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs, which happened to be kind of a fascination of mine. And I just kind of helped them start writing it, and it just seemed really natural and easy, writing the dialogue and all that, because I'd been a reporter already for about 10 years, and you deal with dialogue quite a bit as a reporter. You're talking to people and quoting them and that. And there's a similarity in playwriting, and I think that's kind of what, it's a kind of an effortless sort of different kind of writing, but similar in that respect. And just been, I was pretty involved for about 10 years writing plays, and I haven't done anything new in 14 years maybe. But it's percolating, let's say. There's something great in there. A deadline, pretty much. If I've got a deadline, and I used to help run the theater in Fullerton, and then I had a good relationship with Stages in Fullerton as well, and Patrick and I started working together around 2000, and he would say, "Yeah, I'd like to direct a play of yours, in the next season." And I said, "Well, okay, give me a deadline, and I'll get it done." And that I'm not being facetious. That really does, because I always have ideas, floating in my head, but, give me a deadline and I can kind of focus on that. I want to tell a story for sure, but I also want it to mean something, at least to me. Well, I was always a baseball fan, and I had an uncle who was kind of a shady character, never really knew what he did for a living. He supported himself sometimes by gambling, playing cards, but I think he was always involved in some sort of shady shenanigans. But he never had any money, but when he did, he was really generous, and he would just pop up out of the blue sometimes. And I was around 10 or 11 maybe, and he had a bag full of gifts, and he gave me a tabletop baseball game called Superstar Baseball. Just a simple game, 3 die and player cards and all that. And these players were all legendary real-life baseball figures. And on the back of their cards, it was pretty much biographical information, records they had set, how long they played and all that. But there was one card, and it was one line on it, and it was just different from the rest, and it said, one of the most dominating pitchers of his generation, one of the strangest men to ever play baseball. And that was Rube Waddell's. And that just stuck with me, and I was like, well, why does this guy get singled out? There's been a lot of colorful characters and all that. But that kind of laid the seed, I guess. And why I chose to write about him, I don't know. I think maybe because he's sort of a misfit of sorts, kind of a larger than life sort of character, but also one that obviously had a ferocious drinking problem. Some have conjectured he might have had some kind of mental illness, or maybe short attention span, ADHD, whatever that is. But why I chose to write about him, I'm not quite sure, but I'm glad I did. Well, the story of the play is really, it's kind of a memory play in the sense that Grantland Rice, who also was a real figure, a legendary sports writer in the 1920s and 30s, the biggest sports writer in America at the time. In my play, there's a scene a little bit after the play starts, where Rice is a Cub reporter, and he wants to interview Rube Waddell, and he goes out to a Philadelphia athletics practice, and he talks to Connie Mack, and Mack just sort of, there's no story here. Rube is just like everybody else. And he basically just kind of, shoos Rube away. I'm sorry, Grantland Rice away, and Rice doesn't get a story, but then we flash forward about 20 years or so. Rice is now a seasoned, very known journalist, and he wants to, and Rube has been dead for about 10 years, and he wants to go back and kind of find out who the real Rube Waddell was, because Rube was a great pitcher that posted all these incredible statistics. I think the record for most strikeouts by an American League left-hander is still owned by him, and that's pretty amazing, because that was more than 100 years ago. But there were also all these outlandish tales, all these crazy exploits and deeds that Rube did. There was one a lot of them, they haven't really been sort of proven. They might have been like urban myths or whatever that just grew over the years. But for instance, how Rube would, if he was on the pitching mound, and if you heard a fire truck go by, they didn't have, they might have had bells, I guess, at that time. He would throw off his uniform and run off, and he'd be wearing red suspenders. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But that was a story that grew up around him, and it was retold over and over. And all kinds of other ones. He would dive into burning buildings, not dive. He would run into burning buildings and rescue puppies. Or, and speaking of puppies, opposing teams would bring puppies into the dugout to try to distract him. So he had this like sort of childish air about him, but he was also a big guy and a lot of strength and all that. But. So Rice decides to go back and find out who the real Rube Waddell was. And so he interviews the guys who played with him and his manager and other people that knew him. And it turns out all he's getting are more and more tall stories, and the stories are even bigger. Now it's like Rube didn't just chase after fire engines. He invented the hot dog. Or he wrote "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," and it's just so there's kind of a reason for that. It's sort of like a journalist's stock and trade not stock and trade, but it's about objective truth and being accurate and all that. And as far as Rube goes, it's all subjective, and all Rice wants to do is find the truth about him, and he finds that truth is really, really elusive. So that's really not the story, because it does follow Rube's career, but it's all in past tense, if it makes any sense. And we jump around the time from Rube's early days to Rice 10 years after Rube's dead, and it goes back and forth. But I think it's fairly easy to follow because Patick has done a really good job at streamlining that and not being too worried about it. I would suppose it depends on what you're writing. If you were writing an autobiography and you wanted it to be spot on and accurate and research and all that, that's got to be difficult. But in this play, because the conceit, I guess, of it is that in trying to find the truth of a person behind the legend, Rice doesn't find the truth, and he kind of wrestles with that. As a writer, as a journalist, he really wants it. But because of that, because the main, not the main character, I guess Rube would be, but Rice is what drives the play, he can't find the truth. So that kind of freed me up as a playwright to kind of play around with it as all. I mean, the play is called Rube with an exclamation point, but under it says a play about baseball heavily fictionalized. So we absolutely take great liberties with that, like the stories I told you a little bit earlier about inventing the hot dog. Of course, Rube didn't do that. And we have players who knew Rube or played with him, but they weren't on the same team with him in that year. So it's Ida Tarbell, who was a legendary, pioneering investigative journalist. She's a character in this play. I doubt if she ever, had even heard of Rube Waddell. But and Ty Cobb is I guess you could say the main villain of the play. And Rube and he met or faced each other quite a bit. But as far as his role in this play, that's completely made up. So that made it easier. Because I had some background, because Rube was a real person, so I could incorporate some of the things that were real about him, but I also had, free reign to add whatever I wanted. Well, I hope the audience enjoys it, and maybe I wouldn't be so presumptuous to ask them to think, because that's up to everybody else, but to maybe think about their own stories in life. This is a play about stories quite a bit. Rice is a storyteller, and Rube had tons of stories. And there's some illusions in the play, especially toward the end, that, the only thing we have are stories. They're the things that kind of we tell ourselves who we are, our interactions with the world. And, everybody's got a story. And I guess the only real question is whether you're living the story, telling the story that you want to. I think the Southern California theater audience has to come to this play because it's about baseball. And who doesn't love baseball? Yeah, it's a play about baseball, but it's also a play about stories, and weirdly, it's a play about contemporary America, believe it or not. There's actually some allusions or some scenes in this play that are set against the backdrop of the social agitation of the first decade of the 20th century, and it's pretty amazing how those issues are still here. Whether that's the reason why they should come, they should come because they're going to have a good time.